Hello, students. We are going to be taking a look at some basic grammar rules over the next few skill lessons, and today we're going to get started with some spelling rules. So let's go ahead and take a look at our learning objectives for this skill lesson. After learning about basic spelling rules and seeing how they are used in text examples, students will practice using basic spelling rules correctly. Let's go ahead and go through the tabs. There's only 3 for this skill lesson. On the first tab, you have your vocabulary, and this is not the typical vocabulary drag and drop activity that you do. It's just a list of terminology with the meanings of them as well as an example. Most of these terms you should be pretty familiar with from previous grade levels, but go ahead and take a quick skim through this, and if there's something that you have forgotten about or need a refresher on, go ahead and read the definition and take a look at the example. And when you're ready, skip over to tab 2. I'm not going to go through this entire tab with you. You can do that on your own, but there is a lot here, and basically it's a lot of different rules for spelling. I'm going to just try to highlight 3 or 4 that I think that you should know and try to remember. And from there, we'll give you your final activity. So reading through this, it starts off with the spelling of IE versus EI. And most of us have heard that old phrase, I before E except after C. And that pretty much applies. That's a good rule of thumb, but there are some exceptions that you should probably be aware of. So the usual rule for spelling with IE is that usually the I comes before the E. However, after the letter C, then it usually flips and the E comes before I. Unless, and here's your exceptions, unless the words are in 2 different syllables from each other. So, for example, the word diet. Diet has 2 syllables, and the cutoff point is between the I and the E. And so in that case, you would keep it with the I first and the E second. And then the word scientifically is a great example of this because there is a C. So you think that you would need to flip that I and the E to follow the I before E except after C rule. But sci is 1 syllable. Sci, ent, if, ik, ali. There's like 4 or 5 syllables in there. And sci being the first syllable cuts off between the I and the E, so you would leave it as is. You would not flip the I and the E. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. There's also other words that just don't fit that pattern, such as leisurely, weird, seize, and then also any word that has the long A sound, such as neighbor and way, or the word faint in this case is their example. Those have the long A sound in which case you would flip and have the E first and the I second in order to make that long A sound. So I don't want to confuse any more on that. Read through this, read through the examples and the rules, and hopefully it will make sense. The next section talks about prefixes. That's when you add a few letters to the front of a word, such as habilitate. And if you add an RE in the front, then it becomes rehabilitate. So the general rule of thumb here is that if you're adding a prefix to it, you don't change the spelling. You always keep the original spelling of the word when you add a prefix. That changes when you start adding suffixes, though. Adding a suffix is when you add words to the end of, or letters rather, to the end of the base word. In this case, there is a rule for maybe having to do a double consonant when you add the suffix. And that rule is if it is a single consonant that ends the base word, followed by or preceded by a single vowel, then you have to double that consonant when you add a suffix. So I'm going to say that again. If you have a base word that has a single consonant at the very end of it that was preceded by a single vowel, then you have to double that consonant when you add a suffix. So in the case of fan, in order to say make it fanned, you would have to double the consonant before you add the ed. Otherwise, it looks like it says feigned over here. So again, hopefully that makes sense. Read through the rules and take a look at the examples, and hopefully that makes sense. Let's see. The other final thing I wanted to cover, I'm going to skip all the way down here towards the bottom, is the final Y of a suffix. So like the word biology or fallacy or rely. The question is when do these turn into an I when you add a suffix versus when do you keep it a Y? And here's your basic rule for that. If the letter before the Y is a consonant, then if you add a suffix to this base word, you're going to change that Y into an I, such as biological. You see how that Y became an I. Fallacy became fallacious with an I instead of a Y, because this is a consonant before that Y. Where you keep it a Y is if the letter before the Y is a vowel. In this case, deploy. An O precedes the Y, so you would keep it a Y when you add the suffix. So this kind of stuff can get pretty confusing and pretty tricky. I would say just take your time and read through this stuff, and hopefully it makes sense. When you feel that you are ready, you can practice this in the Your Turn tab. There are several questions here that will hopefully drill this concept home for you. You can check your own answers, and there will be explanations for if you miss a question, so try to understand why you missed it. I think sometimes that's more helpful than anything, is just trying it, and when you make a mistake, reading the reason why you made that mistake. Then you're also going to do a little bit of practice here with adding some suffixes to a few words. And that's really about it. If you find that you're getting confused by this, I know some of these rules can be pretty tricky, but feel free to talk to me and I'll be happy to try to clarify them.